Finally, there will be a film festival in Faenza from March 1st to 5th. We talk about it with Andrea Valmori, who is the artistic director.
We have finally kicked off this new event for the city of Faenza. The festival is called Noam and stands for North America. So these are the initials we have combined together. And it is called precisely No Amo Faenza Film Festival because Faenza is still a very important part of an event that features cinema from mainly 3 countries: the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and thus a narrative that moves from cinema to other directions as well. We will talk about sports, we will talk about photography, we will also talk about music. And so the appointment is indeed in the heart of the city to encounter a new, different, unseen, even unpublished cinema. We have several premieres, both Italian and even a European premiere, and indeed a series of events that we would like you to discover, especially those who are local, but also those coming from outside.
What was the process of organizing a festival of this kind like?
In contemporary times, it is increasingly problematic to understand how to relate to the concept of a premiere. More often than not, we prefer to wait for films to be released on streaming rather than going to the cinema. With the film festival, we have instead tried to offer content that people who come to my station often risk not seeing at all. And so we started with the idea of selecting international films that will be presented with subtitles in their original language, and especially doing it in a city like Faenza, which, although it may seem strange, has many cinemas. Europa Sarti and Italia are all theaters in the historic center of the city. There's also Cine Dream, an external multiplex. Faenza is a city that thrives on cinema, although the period we are currently living in, especially post-pandemic, has seen a significant decline in theater attendance. We hope and count on the fact that this new initiative we are bringing and proposing can also bring back an audience that may have distanced themselves from the in-person cinema experience. We aim to create an event that can be remembered and, as often happens with in-person events, leave a lasting memory for the spectators who decide to join us at the festival.
Among the titles we will see in a few days, is there any film with a particular audio or that is very characteristic for the film itself?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, the 9 titles in competition, 5 from the United States, 2 from Mexico, and 2 from Canada, are titles that we could largely define as genre films. What does that mean? Moving between thriller, horror, and musical genres, in addition to a selection of dramatic films, they see the characteristics of the genre itself as an important component to be enhanced through the sensation of audio. That is, contemporary cinema, for several years now, has been increasingly working on the sensory experience of the viewer, both visually and auditorily. The immersiveness of the cinema experience is now a factor that we all know. From audiovisuals, understood as music videos, to the realm of video games, and indeed, to the more traditional domain of cinema, audio has played and continues to play a fundamental role. In particular, I believe that thrillers should be experienced, not only in theaters with appropriate audio, but also side by side with other viewers so that the shared experience, both acoustically and emotionally with your seatmate, can be maximized. And of course, in the coming years, the event will also aim to work on a cinema that seeks to highlight a series of contents that are somewhat closer to our age demographic. We are an association of young people and we would like to engage a young audience in Faenza.
Cinema is constantly evolving and has entered our homes, first with television, then with VHS, DVDs, Blu-rays, and now streaming. But how do you see the new technological frontier of this sector?
Surely, the audience that watches films has expanded because, on one hand, there is talk of a cinema crisis, but in reality, we have more and more people who can access many different types of content. Several years ago, before the advent of home video distribution, it was virtually impossible to rewatch a film. You either had to pay for multiple cinema tickets or wait for it to be broadcast on television. Today, from this point of view, we can see almost everything in every possible way. However, since there is no longer a problem of finding films to watch and we can access everything, the most important dimension for the viewer at home today has become watching a film in the highest possible quality. Therefore, both in terms of screens and audiovisual impact, meaning both the visual and audio aspects, it is increasingly important and challenging to keep up with technological advancements. And so we see this in the large theaters, where systems like Atmos have been developed, providing a 360-degree sound mapping of the theater environment, as well as technologies that have evolved over the years, such as the rediscovery of 3D, which was very popular in 2009 with Avatar and has recently made a comeback with Avatar 2, but especially in the domestic setting. The cinephile viewer increasingly wants quality, a viewing experience at its highest potential. In this sense, I believe that the experience of augmented reality, and thus VR, also moves towards an immersiveness that is yet to be discovered, but also to be implemented. So the path that awaits us in the coming years will be to implement what we can have at home, to create an experience that increasingly resembles that of the cinema.
Regarding immersiveness, that type of experience, let's say audio has made strides a bit earlier compared to video with the advent of Dolby 5.1 sound.
Absolutely. And I also believe that given how we are configured on a sensory level, it is a dimension that our body can perceive in a much less impactful, much less invasive way. Audio somehow accompanies our vision, whereas often the use of 3D glasses or a headset can cause nausea or make it difficult because our eyes are not used to being enclosed in an external system. Instead, the audio seems to accompany us, and in this sense, it has also been a precursor. Therefore, there have been more studies to improve the quality of these products, but there has also been a truly rewarding aspect in terms of the viewer's experience.
Unfortunately, audio is often underestimated compared to video. They say watching movies, but in reality, if one were to watch the film without listening to it, wouldn't be the same experience.
Look, as a joke, I can tell you that it's very trendy on social media right now to change the soundtrack of some films, so a horror movie with a certain type of musical background becomes a comedy. The dimension of audio is fundamental, and even in the history of cinema, when looking at the major changes that have occurred, without a doubt, everyone recognizes the transition from silent to sound as the greatest revolution in terms of the expressive capabilities of the cinematic medium. The transition from black and white to color didn't cause any problems. Films are intentionally released in black and white for aesthetic reasons. Sound, on the other hand, has made cinema history, changed the course of that art, and is still fundamental today. So much so that even the professional roles emerging in the world of cinema, such as the role of the sound designer, are increasingly in demand and increasingly important.
Even though at first this transition wasn't painful, and it wasn't, let's say, automatic for everyone to make that reasoning, because the first films that came out with audio were discrediting for many actors. Some said, no, a good actor doesn't need audio, doesn't need to speak, they should express themselves without sound. Then, many actors who were excellent in silent films disappeared when audio was introduced, because maybe they didn't have a distinctive voice, they weren't able to speak in a certain way, to express themselves with their voice, as they did, physically with gestures.
It is correct, and like many other transitional moments in the history of cinema, it was the audience who decided, because sound gave a sense of realism to the films that silent movies could not provide. Genres were born. The musical obviously did not exist before. How much gangster cinema or Western cinema changed thanks to the gunfights we could hear in the theater. And of course, the industry had a big problem, because on one hand there are the actors, and certainly some actors stopped acting because their style was very different. Charlie Chaplin protested a lot, eventually switched to sound, but struggled greatly. And others, obviously with less talent, ended up not acting anymore. The interesting thing, however, is that productions also faced enormous problems, because initially, The sound recording equipment had very noisy machines. It was not easy to place the microphones correctly to achieve a satisfactory recording to be shown on the big screen. And so indeed the story of those years, which has been partly shown, for example, in Singin' in the Rain, which is now a great classic and reflects on that period, or more recently in Damien Chazelle's film Babylon, tells of that transition, a transition that was traumatic in some ways, but which today seems indispensable for how cinema has actually evolved.
I believe that every technological transition in any sector has somewhat experienced what has just been described. There are, let's say, people or professionals who are more technologically forward-thinking and embrace these new things. And then there are those who are more reluctant and say that no, this technology is not useful. It doesn't work for all these reasons. Then, of course, it's the audience that decides, and we know what the story is.
Exactly. So, I believe that any new development should simply be evaluated and taken as a tool, an opportunity. In the end, the viewer's experience is paramount, and in this sense, as I mentioned earlier, relating to viewing experiences, I am convinced that 3D has no future, whereas in 2009 it seemed to have a lot of potential. Today, however, the audio sphere, for various reasons, will continue to grow to a level where immersiveness will reach a quality that was objectively unimaginable 50 years ago.
I'm curious to see these new premieres at Noam here in Faenza.
Thank you, Andrea. Reminder, the event is from March 1st to 5th. March 1st and 2nd, we will be at Cinema Europa. And from March 3rd to 5th, we will be at Cinema Sarti. All evenings will be introduced by a talk or a workshop, so the appointment is always at 8:30 p.m. to discover the guest of the evening, and at 9:30 p.m. we can then enjoy the film. So I thank you very much for this interview, and of course for all your followers and friends. We are fully available to provide additional information and welcome you, especially in the cinema.
Thank you. Have a great festival.
Kreti, thank you much.